So welcome to the panel discussion today. First off, the introduction of the introduction. So I'm Eric Hughes, I'm with the Hive branding agency. We have a distinguished expert panel here today to talk about the future of work is now. First off, though, I do want to thank our sponsors, Entergy and MWB, for making panels like this possible, and indeed the entire conference. So thank you all for attending today. We're going to keep things rolling. We're going to do 30 minutes. I will tell you, we had a phone call last week, this group, and I kind of wish we had recorded it, because we could have gone for like an hour on this topic easily, and then I cut us off at like 30 minutes, because that's all the time we have. But I do hope to give these folks a good opportunity to answer some questions at the end. So I'm on a mission to give you guys time to take advantage of these folks and ask them direct questions. So with that, we will get rolling. The topic here is knowing that there's a boundless yet seemingly sometimes confusing options for remote hybrid workplace models. What has shaken out after the pandemic, and what's working and what's not working for different types of businesses, and how do you navigate that? Whether you're starting a business or you already have a business and you're looking to expand it, expectations of people who you might hire, what they come to the table with, and how to think about those issues as you get your team together and grow it. So with that, I want to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, run about a minute on who they are, what they do, and who they do it for. So we'll start with Amber.
I'm Amber. I am Amber Coeur. I'm the president and CEO of Lobaki. We are a virtual and augmented reality content creation company located right down the road here in downtown Jackson. And we focus on creating content in this amazing technology that we, in the short version, say for learning. So for K-12, community colleges, and our industry partners.
Gosh, how do you follow that?
Pretty powerful.
I know, right?
Pretty strong.
I'm Adam Horlock with Office Evolution. We are part of the nation's largest locally owned and operated co-working flex office space. Our location is in Flowood, across the street from the airport, and so we provide flex office solutions, co-working, virtual business options for businesses that are just starting up, or existing businesses looking for remote options, or virtual options. So very familiar with this topic and what we're looking at today. So happy to be here.
Yes, good morning. I am Lauren Dendy, and I am with FORVIS accounting firm. We are the 8th largest accounting firm in the nation. I am in HR and campus recruiting. We have 68 locations nationwide, but we were formerly BKD. We merged with another firm this summer, and we've changed our name to FORVIS. So I'm happy to be here this morning and happy to discuss these topics.
Great. Yeah, good team, good group. Varying sizes and challenges. And also great to have a co-work space, professional here, because that's a big part of this topic. So I'm going to start with sort of the question for one we had. At the end of this, I hope to wrap up with 3 big takeaways from the group, so just kind of keep that in mind. The pandemic, it affected every bit of our society. Education, healthcare, workplace, families, everything. But in the workplace, giant experiment forced on companies of all sizes. We weren't ready to experiment that quickly with that many different options in workplace models, from remote to hybrid to completely virtual. And so I want to ask the panel, start with Amber and then go down this way and the next one come this way. What factors, now that we've lived in this for a while as business leaders, what factors should business leaders be looking at when they weigh whether or not they should have hybrid, remote, or, as some are, demanding straight up in person, or completely virtual? What factors should business leaders be weighing when they're looking at that decision? Amber?
Well, for us, one of the things that, one of the big words everybody's talking about is productivity, and how all these things have changed that. For us, we had a very quick introduction to that. We were producing something for a client that had a very strict deadline, and we'd just taken on the contract right when COVID hit, and the strict deadline of getting it done by May. But we, like everybody, went home and we're working remotely, and the team got through it and produced a great product, and at the end of it, they begged to come back. They said, please, working this way and doing what we do, we can't be collaborative. We can't, it actually takes more time to do virtual, even though what we do is very high tech. And so, even from their perspective, it was frustrating. And so for us, listening to our team and making sure that they were able to do what they needed to do for their job was a very big thing. And we always want to have our ears and eyes open. And for us, it's very surprising, but a lot of people think, oh, you're tech, you don't need to be in an office. It's the exact opposite for us.
Interesting, right, I've heard that before.
Listening was a big part of that, and really hearing what the team needed. And so we did that pretty quickly, and we're back in the office pretty fast, honestly.
So listen to your team, know their needs, weigh their needs, pull them in on the conversation is a big part of the decision. Adam?
Yeah, I would say since 2020, we have some great examples of what didn't work. You can look at big Wall Street firms, you can look at so many other larger companies across the country, and so many tried to figure it out and really failed. They had 2 days a week in the office, 3 days a week out of the office, and they would change the schedule. And then some companies would divide people by last names. You would come in on certain days and then not. And you really lost a lot of productivity just because a lot of the team members were trying to figure out, okay, what days am I in the office? What days am I not in the office? With that being said, we are seeing a lot of businesses cut back on a lot of their square footage in their offices. They're not renewing leases. They're looking at other options, some of which what we do in terms of they're looking for flexible options, they're looking for co-working space, they're looking for space that they can rapidly scale up and scale down as they need to. I would add a little bit to what Amber said, but when you're looking at this and trying to figure out, okay, it's now 2022, where do we really go? Keep the end result in mind as you're trying to figure out, do we need to be hybrid, do we need to be half remote, do we need to all be in person? Think about if the pandemic hadn't happened, where would we really be right now? Would we all be in person? Would we have experimented on our own with remote work? Keep the end result in mind when you're trying to figure out how to scale your organization and where your workforce is, and let that be your guide and not copy what perhaps others are doing because a lot got it wrong.
Good point. Yeah, the road is strewn with failed experiments.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of them since 2020.
Lauren?
Yes, so our firm is actually a hybrid firm. We allow, on average, around 3 days in the office, 2 days working from home. And since we kind of integrated the hybrid policy, what we have found, especially in our Mississippi office, is that more of our workers are coming to the office. And I don't know if that has to do with a mentality issue of, hey, I'm not being forced to come to the office, but instead I am driving and waking up every day and choosing to work from the office. And also an engagement standpoint, with our staff and working on either audit or tax projects, but being engaged and not being virtual and being in the office so that they can rely on each other from a team aspect. We have found that opening those doors, I think everyone is learning individual traits about themselves. And I think that's a good point to highlight, some know that they are more productive in the office versus working from home.
Right. Comes back to listening, knowing your team,
Right.
knowing what makes each person tick and work better. So, and I like the point about, don't just copy. Let's, look at your individual. So next question. So fear was a big part of what governed how we looked at workplace as we went through the pandemic. And I think one of those big fears for a lot of business leaders is, what's going to happen to my productivity? How am I going to monitor? How am I going to make sure that the people who are at home are actually working, getting their work done, putting in the proper time, making the right phone calls, doing the right meetings? So what have you all learned? I'll start with Lauren. What have you all learned about how to navigate that fear of productivity and what's working?
Well, we have set up a coach program. So any of our new hires through honestly the manager level, have coaches. And our coaches are there to guide them along the way of really sitting down with them, asking them what is working. So my best advice is get a coach, get a mentor that can work individually with someone to make sure that what they are doing and what they have planned is going along with the team and going along with the firm.
That's interesting. I mean, I hadn't even thought about that. You might even want to have like a chief production officer sort of concept. CPO, 3 CPO, extra points if you call it that, tell me if it's Star Wars geek. But being able to coach people and let them know it's a new place. If you're going to work from home, here's how to do this and not when to do it, how to achieve balance. Adam?
Yeah, actually, I was going to pick up right on that find ways, and I think it starts with the leadership of your company, organization, find ways to show that productivity. If you figure out what model works best, if it's all remote, if it's hybrid, some sort of blend of hybrid, whatever that is, or if it's all in person, find ways, especially at the top, at the leadership, to show that productivity, show that the model works, show that this is the end result that we'll get out of it. And the team will follow. I mean, they'll see the results, they'll see what's building. We hear a lot about, and I think I saw an article last week, if I'm not mistaken, on productivity theater, on, there's been this movement towards quiet quitting and all these other things that are happening here lately. Now we have productivity theater of the workforce, either hybrid or remote or not necessarily engaged, and they're doing things not necessarily that adds to the productivity of your company organization. So show what productivity looks like, especially at the leadership level, and your team will follow.
Yeah, set the mark. Tell them what productivity looks like for your model, for your mission, and be clear. Communication's huge in that. So, Amber?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Communication, I think culture is a big part of it. If before the pandemic, if you weren't keystroke checking your employees, why are we doing that now? And so part of setting expectations, communicating those expectations clearly, and having a culture that lays out, this is what's expected, this is what we do, and this is how we do it, that completely changes what productivity is and what's possible.
Why does it matter to your company is a really big deal. And just ripping off that, one of the things leading up to this discussion that I read about is I was looking for what were the failures, and you all probably read about these. And one of the common failures we've seen is when companies forced in person, or they didn't really need to be forced, or they gave different days for different people. A through H come Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm going to mess this up, but I through Z come Tuesday, Thursday. Well, they didn't think about teams. Like, no, let's not think about it alphabetically. Let's think about it about the productivity, and let's have this team that needs to work together come in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This team can come in on, and that sounds like obvious, but a lot of companies missed that. They just wanted to get back 100% in person as fast as they can. They kind of skip the process of thinking, wait a minute, let's rethink this pandemic aside. So power segue points, because the next topic is culture. So actually prior to the pandemic, I think one of the biggest topics in forward-thinking progressive companies, particularly among startups, restarts, it was culture. It had all the ink. Culture was how we were going to get a competitive advantage with our brands and our companies. And then we all went home. And culture kind of went poof. And so my question to the panel will start with Amber. Actually, you're first.
I'll go first.
Yeah,
sure.
I'll mix it up. So the question is, okay, thinking about culture and how important it is, and I think even more important now, how can business leaders navigate when you may be in a hybrid situation and people may not be quote unquote present? How can you foster culture?
So we were having this conversation about culture prior to the pandemic.
Right.
And I think it's important for everybody to remember in those conversations, you can have a terrible culture and be all in person. And certainly there were great examples of companies that had a terrible culture prior to the pandemic. So when you're thinking about culture and thinking about how to build culture, whether you have a hybrid team or in person, bad culture follows bad companies regardless of whether you're at home or working at Starbucks or hopefully at a co-working space or anywhere else. So keep that in mind. When you're building culture, I know this is a big idea panel, and it's a really big idea to build it, but break it down in its more fundamental blocks. Try to build values first, figure out where your values are as a company, as a brand. From there, that begins the building block of determining what your culture is and if your team will follow it or not. So I think that's most important is figure out what your model is, figure out how you're going to implement that model in terms of how your workforce, where they'll be working, what kind of system. But start with your values first to build to that culture instead of just trying to tackle what is our culture.
Yeah, great points. Lauren?
Yeah, so great points, but we are a people-centered culture in public accounting because in public accounting you're working on teams and also you're working with your clients, right? So whenever it comes to culture, you've got to nail down what is that culture base, and ours is people. So, the people aspect comes first and foremost in our employees, but and I like to always say NFL cities as our larger locations, and they missed the mark, and they did exactly what you're describing of bringing them in based on last names. And until we finally figured out, we're going to offer this hybrid flexibility schedule. But then still, we had a lot that really liked to work from home. So to bring them back into the office, you've got to honestly offer something engaging. You've got to have that engagement factor. So we set up, if it's monthly happy hours or just something different for the team to get engaged with and to make sure that everyone feels like they belong and they're on a team, to keep that people first mentality.
Right. Yeah, no, great points, because I think one of the things we all, whether you were a C-suite or you were, a rookie starting with a company, I think one of the things we all missed on different levels, unless you're extreme introvert, you're like, yay, pandemic. I think connection. We lost connection. And I think, sometimes as business leaders, when we hear you have to offer something to get people to come into work, some of us go, really? Because the paycheck was offered. But, absolutely. But I think, that special sauce that you can offer that impacts productivity is connection. Finding different ways, hybrid, remote, or otherwise, to remain connected, and deepening those connections makes a better team. And the point about people is really important, because I think a lot of companies miss out on this regardless, pre-pandemic or otherwise. Process is not culture. Process is not. People are. So, hopefully you have, a chief culture officer. If you don't, you have a 4-person business, you're like, okay, I'm janitor, accountant, president, and chief culture officer. Just remember, it's about people. Amber?
Yeah, I think kind of what all of that kind of comes together is the sense of presence is really what's super important about that. And there are different ways to have that sense of presence that really impacts the culture, impacts the productivity. And there are ways to do that. Side plug, VR is one of those ways.
Well done.
A little self-serving, but it's very, very, very true.
Right.
And talking about the future of work is now, less than 2 weeks ago, Meta came out with a new headset, and they've partnered with Microsoft. And I don't know if you've heard of these two very large companies, but that's saying a lot. And what that says to me in our business, as well as what I see outwardly, is bringing in a sense of presence through technology that's very different. If you haven't experienced VR, that is always what I say is the difference between putting on a headset versus looking at a computer screen and talking to someone through Zoom, is the sense of presence that you can get. And I think that that's one of the things that this headset, this technology, what we're seeing, we're trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And at a very big level. You've got these huge companies saying, we've had this problem and we have this amazing technology. How can that help bridge the gap?
Literally a whole new world.
It is.
Figuratively and actually, literally.
Yes.
Okay, so panel challenge, surprise, sort of. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to riff on this key takeaway. So we've got 3 key takeaways for you. We're going to challenge the panel on time here. Okay, Lauren, I'm going to give you this one. Communication is key to your future of work being now.
Absolutely. Communication drives everything. Communication with your team, communication with the coaches, communication is number one when it comes to people. We couldn't have the great workforce that we have in our office if we didn't have the communication. So whether that's talking about what tomorrow brings, but everything revolves around communication. So our culture, aside from the people aspect, that communication is key, is right there with it.
And clear communication. Just talking to people individually and as a group, there are some things you communicate as a group, and obviously some things you communicate individually, and that individual attention is what people crave. So remember that. Okay, Adam, here's your challenge. Another key takeaway. Fly in the quotes. Presence is powerful. Being present is powerful to the future of work being now.
It is, and I would add consistency to that.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not if you don't have, with communication, with anything, if it's not consistent,
right?
I mean, you can overdo it. I mean, we've all seen the online memes of the Zoom call could have been an email and everything else.
Yep.
But I think consistency is really important with that, and so I would add that.
And how many times have you, just raise your hand if you have been this person where you've been on a Zoom, but not really on the Zoom? Yeah, fair, right? So I think presence isn't just a physical concept.
Yeah.
I think if you're in a hybrid situation, or anytime you're on a Zoom, especially if you're leading it, but if you're attending, when you turn your camera off, understood. Maybe you're in your PJs or whatever, you didn't clean, the room in the background, that's why they have those fake backgrounds. But being present, state of mind, engaged and involved, even if you're at home, especially on Zooms, it's really critical. And as facilitators of Zooms, leaders of those meetings, I think and I've been in a lot of them, when the leader is just doing all the talking, and that's not a meeting. That's not being present yourself. That's a class, is what that is. So fostering being present as part of your culture, even in hybrid situations, even in Zooms, or in virtual, that's a key aspect. Okay, Amber, third takeaway. Culture defines performance to the future of work being now.
I think if you had a key. And I think it's just incredibly important. And it doesn't matter if you're a small group of 3 people going to 2 people, you're going to have a cultural challenge, right? You're going to have, we were 3 and we knew what we were doing, and introing new people and new ideas and new ways into that. Well, how do you grow the culture, and how do you expand that? How do you listen? How do you communicate? How do you create that sense of presence to be productive, right? Or if you're a large company and you had a merger, and what culture do you take on? And those are really, really important decisions. We're around 20, 25 people. One person at our size makes a difference, and it's also, you have to be very cognizant of that person coming in, and making sure that your team is ready for that and knows how to bring that person in. Everyone should be part of the culture. It shouldn't just be from a leadership standpoint. You have to live it and you have to walk it, but everyone on your team should be part of that culture and should be able to live it and should be able to exemplify whatever it is that is important to.
Great point. And you know, the discussion of culture sounds really soft to a lot of business leaders, like culture. Okay, we're going to have some lunches and happy hours. No. You can look this up on YouTube. I saw this last week. A trainer for Navy SEALs, which is some of the most high-performing, high expectation performance, did a group of business leaders and described how they pick the people who make the final cut. Wish I had a whiteboard, but for sake of time, imagine this. On one axis is trust, and another is performance. And what they found was that the most high-performing, most productive Navy SEALs they had did not index the highest on performance. They indexed somewhere near middle to upper on performance, but extremely high with the team on trust. Because they knew that if the team trusted each other, everyone performed better. And you're talking about saving lives. I'm talking about, transforming brands. Slightly less important, but I thought that was a really amazing takeaway. And so I think trust is fundamental in the future of work, and knowing that there's a balance between trust and performance. And celebrating success is a big deal, right? So we are going to now, great job, little golf clap for the panel on that. That's a very loud golf clap, by the way, I would say. So I want to open it up real quick to questions from the floor for any of the panelists. Hands raised. Okay, right over here.
The idea of culture is going to be, if all of you want to answer, one of you, but so company I work for, they changed the way they approached it from culture fit to culture guide, and also saying that people, they feel valued when you value their strengths. So these are the things they love about themselves. So I'm wondering if any of you have an example where you opened yourself up to an ad rather than a fit, and how that will impact on your business.
So opening yourself up to an ad, right? That's a great question.
Really good.
Because, you have in mind, a person you're trying to, a role you're trying to fill, and you realize, wait a second, this person, let's do an ad, not just a fit, and how that affects culture. Example.
I think I kind of have one.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, we're getting the
Okay, so let's answer this question.
So very quickly, have someone on the team that came on literally the week before the pandemic kind of shut everything down, and their job was supposed to be very specific and going out and doing something. Well, that changed. And instead of saying, well, you don't have a job anymore, we, for 2 years, have been figuring out how this person fits in with what we do, and literally as of a week ago figured out, over these years we found, here's your strengths, here's how you fit, you are incredibly valuable, and let's put you in this new role that we're creating for you that we figured out over all this time. And I mean, it's like literally a completely different person too. And so we believe that, that we're seeing a difference already, and just that culture, the ability for them to be seen for their value and what they are, and putting them in a place where they're fit to be more successful is what we're hoping that does.
And I'm pins and needles because I want to go 20 seconds on this, so I know we did this, but real quickly. I think this is a fundamental, important question to not just culture, but performance. I would really encourage every business leader in here, if you haven't had a conversation among your leadership group, to have the conversation about what it means to have products and services and verticals that you're going to exploit, and that means draining every penny, every performance, everything you can out of that to be more profitable. But this is the factor most forget. Talk very pointedly about what you're going to explore. The open book, right? Where are we that we shouldn't where do we need to go that we are now? And when you have that discussion and you're willing to invest in it, hey, look, that's my official timer. When you really have that conversation in a serious way, it opens the door to the notion of let's do some ads, not necessarily some fits. So if you need help with that discussion, I know a really great agency that can help, so there's my final plug. So thanks again to our sponsors, Entergy and MWB, and I think that's the end. Great question. This group will be around. You'll see them. Feel free to stop us at any time in the hallways to ask us other questions. So thank you.